was not expected. And as time went on, they went back to their Bibles, and then they began to study the prophecies. They began to study Daniel, 2 Thessalonians 2, and they began to study the book of Revelation. Luther did this. Calvin did this. Jerome did this. Huss did this. Wycliffe did this. Many of the Protestant reformers did this. Wesley did this later on. And as they began to study the Bible, lo and behold, they began to put the pieces together. They went to Daniel 7. They read about the lion, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire falling. They saw the 10 horns representing the breakdown of the Roman Empire and the nations that were established in Europe that came from the north, the Germanic tribes. And they saw this. And then they read about that little horn coming right up, right there out of the Roman Empire, among the 10 horns, right in Europe. That would start small but get bigger and bigger and bigger, would have eyes like a man, human leadership, would have a mouth saying great things, making great claims for itself, and then eventually this little horn began to make war on the saints. And they saw this right in their Bibles. And so one by one, the Protestant reformers, as they looked at the Bible and put the pieces together, they realized that that little horn was right in front of them. That it was the papal power. It was the institution of the Vatican, centered in Rome. Now, they were Catholics themselves. And so I don't believe this applies to the people themselves, but more the system, the papal system centered in Rome as an institution centered in the popes. And they saw this. And then they realized that all the pieces fit together. And there's a famous Protestant saying. And the word Protestant, many people don't know this, but you know what the word Protestant really means? It means protest. Protestants. They protested against the church and wanted to get people back to the Bible. And once they studied prophecy, then there's a famous Protestant saying, and this is what it is, that the Protestant reformers, in the blazing light of Jesus Christ, they discovered Antichrist. They discovered Jesus Christ and Antichrist right in front of them. They saw Christ, then they saw a power that was leading away from Christ, and then they identified it as Antichrist. That came right up from within the church. It was subtle, it was deceptive, it was working right there, and they had to do battle with it, just like the principles that were in the book of 1 John. Same thing. And 2 John. Here's a quotation that appeared in 1999. This was just a few years ago in Newsweek. This was a particular issue right before Y2K that dealt with prophetic theories that were current in the religious world. This fascinating issue, and it says there, you can see it right on the screen, November 1, 1999, page 72, that Martin Luther was the first to identify the papacy as such with the Antichrist. Now, this is not exactly accurate. He really wasn't the first, but he was one of the main ones in the 1500s. And then it says that this was a view that was to become dogma for all Protestant churches. This is right there in Newsweek. I mean, I didn't write this. This is just based on history, that this became the teaching of the major Protestant churches and the major Protestant reformers for 400 years. Here's another quote from Daubigny. He's the classic Protestant historian who wrote the history of the Reformation of the 16th century. And this is what he said. He wrote, quote, "Luther proved by the revelations of Daniel and St. John, by the epistles of St. Paul, St. Peter, and St. Jude, that the reign of Antichrist predicted and described in the Bible was the papacy." Luther did it based upon the Bible. He did it based on Daniel and Paul and Revelation and 1st and 2nd John, and he saw it right there, and he took a strong stand, and he was willing to die for this. And as a result of this prophecy, especially in Daniel 7, there was a mass exodus out of the Church of Rome. Now, here's a chart on the screen, which is very important. And it shows the basic sequence of Daniel 7 that we've already studied. There's Babylon, there's Persia, there's Greece, there's Rome, the breakdown of the Roman Empire, then there's that little horn, and all of the Protestants said that was the church, the Roman church. They saw the prophecies successively fulfilled in history. And on the top there of that slide, it says this was called Protestant historicism. Protestant historicism. That was their doctrine of understanding prophecy that they saw prophecy being fulfilled straight down in history. That is extremely important to understand. And again, because of this prophecy and other prophecies, there was a mass exodus out of the Church of Rome, and a terrible breach took place in Christianity in Europe because people were coming back to Jesus, back to the Bible, and preaching about the prophecies. This is exactly what happened. Well, some more history to tell you. The Roman Church reacted against the Protestant Reformation, and this was called the Counter-Reformation. And there's a lot of history behind this. You can read it in the history books. You can read it in the book Time Delusions. There's all kinds of books out there that talk about this. And what happened was the Roman Church didn't like the fact that the Protestants were pointing the finger at them, and they said, we've got to do something. So they reacted in the Counter-Reformation, and they had a major council that took place in the year 1545. It went on in different sessions to the year 1563, an 18-year period, and it was called the Council of Trent, just north of Rome in Italy. And it was a very famous Catholic council where the leaders came together to plan how to deal with the Protestant Reformation and with all the people that were leaving the church. At that council, there was one particular order that was set aside and given a specific assignment to counteract the preaching of the Protestants. They were to do this through open warfare, they were to do it through intrigue, and they were to do it through theology. Anybody know the name of that order? It was, the longer version is the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits. And in the 1500s, in the Council of Trent, the Jesuits were commissioned by the Vatican to specifically develop counter theories to take the blame off of the Roman Church. And so they went to work. One particular Jesuit, his name was Francisco Ribera. He was a Jesuit from Spain, from Salamanca, Spain. He was a brilliant man, a doctor of the law and of studies, and he went to work on this. And there's a quote there from George Eldon Ladd, a very respected Protestant commentator. He's not alive anymore, but he wrote a book called The Blessed Hope, a biblical study of the Second Advent and the Rapture in 1956. And there on the screen there, you can see a picture of Ribera's book and the quote there from Ladd, which says, in the year 1590, not long after the Council of Trent, Ribera published a commentary on the book of Revelation as a counter-interpretation to the prevailing view among Protestants, which identified the papacy with the Antichrist. And then Ribera said Antichrist would be a single evil person who would be received by the Jews and would build up Jerusalem. So Ribera studied the prophecies that Luther studied. He saw the lion, the bear, the leopard, the dragon, the 10 horns, the little horn, and then what he said was that little horn applies to somebody that would come way down at the end of time, one super bad guy who would make war against the Jews. That was Ribera's interpretation of the prophecies. And that view, theologically, became known as futurism. And there you can see our chart there. You see the lion, the bear, the leopard, the dragon, or the fourth beast. You see Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And what Ribera said was that when Rome fell, there was a gap, the Jesuit gap. And then at the very end, that little horn would come up at the end, and he would be one man, one Mr. Sin, who would make war upon the Jews at the end. So the prophecy went on, and then it stopped. And then there's a big gap, and then it picks up at the end. That is the futurist view that was promoted by Francisco Ribera. And the amazing fact is that that view has been popularized by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins in their best-selling series, Left Behind. Left Behind is really, there's a lot involved in Left Behind, but one of the main elements of this series is that it is simply a fictionalized version of this core element of Francisco Ribera's theology. That one man is the Antichrist who comes at the end, and Left Behind picked it up and made it into a series of very fast-reading novels